She was the Mudblood who had married a Malfoy. He was the heir who had signed away half an empire to stand beside her at an altar and never told her. This story is written for you. The carriage ride back to the manor took 47 minutes. Hermione counted them by the tick of the enchanted clock set into the carriage wall, a small brass thing that had been a wedding gift from someone whose name she could no longer remember. 47 minutes of silence, so complete that she could hear the whisper of her own pulse in her ears, the soft rasp of Draco's breathing across from her, the rain drumming its patient fingers against the roof. He had not looked at her since they left the ministry. He sat very still, the way he always sat when he was holding something in, spine straight against the velvet, one gloved hand resting on his knee, the other curled loose around the silver head of his cane. His face was turned toward the window, but she knew he was not watching the rain-blurred lamps of London smear past. He was doing what he always did now. He was waiting for the door of the manor to close behind them so that the silence could become official. She pressed her palms flat against the black silk of her gown. The fabric was cold. The whole evening had been cold, from the moment they'd walked into the ministry ballroom, and the conversation around them had dropped half a register, as it always did, as it had done for 3 years now. She had learned to walk through that small death of sound without flinching. She had learned to smile past the eyes that slid from her face to her left hand and back again, cataloguing the ring, cataloguing her, weighing what kind of woman wore the Malfoy crest on her finger. What she had not learned, what she could not seem to learn, was how to bear it when Draco's hand tightened on her elbow, and then, a moment later, let go. He had done it tonight. He always did it. Some pure-blood matriarch would approach with her smile set like aspic, and Hermione would feel the small, brief press of his fingers against her arm. Steady. I am here. And then the letting go. The careful half-step back, as though his nearness might make things worse for her, as though he had decided, long ago, and without consulting her, that she would be safer if he kept a cool foot of air between them in public. She had tried once, early on, to tell him that the distance hurt worse than any of it. She had tried to say, "I married you, Draco, not your absence." But the words had come out wrong, sharpened by a long day, and he had gone that particular shade of still that meant he had heard her as a criticism rather than a plea. He had apologized in that low, precise voice. He had not touched her for 3 days afterward. Now, in the carriage, she watched the line of his jaw in the passing lamplight and tried to remember the last time he had reached for her without being asked. The gates of the manor opened for them with the old slow groan of wrought iron that remembered other centuries. The drive curved through the beech avenue, and the house rose up at the end of it, pale as bone against the bruised sky. Every window was lit. Narcissa had ordered it so, years ago, the first winter Hermione had come to live there. So you never feel you are arriving at a tomb, my dear. And the order had never been rescinded. The lights burned now whether anyone was home or not. A courtesy grown into a habit grown into a haunting. The carriage stopped. A house elf opened the door. Draco stepped down first and turned to offer her his hand, gloved and steady. And for a moment, just for a moment, Hermione considered not taking it. considered stepping down on her own and sweeping past him into the hall and letting him see what his careful distance looked like from the inside. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers through 2 layers of kid skin, and she could not feel the warmth of him at all. "Thank you," she said, because she still said it, because some small, stubborn thing in her refused to let the rituals die, even as the marriage thinned around them. Granger. He had called her that on their wedding day, whispered against her hair at the altar, and it had been the most tender thing she had ever heard. Now it came out flat, a habit, a handle he had stopped knowing how to hold. They walked up the steps together, and the great doors swung open, and the hall swallowed them, warm and vast, and smelling of the beeswax the elves used on the dark panelling, of wood smoke from the library fire, of something faintly green and astringent that was probably the rosemary narcissa kept in silver bowls in every alcove to ward off damp. Home. This was supposed to be home. "Tea?" Draco said without looking at her. He was already unfastening his cloak, and his voice was pitched for a stranger. "I can ring for—" "No, thank you. You didn't eat. I wasn't hungry." A pause. She watched the back of his neck, the pale line of it above the starched collar, and she saw the small tell she had learned to read over 3 years, the faint rise of his shoulders as he took a breath he did not let out. "The Selwyn woman," he said, still not turning, "was out of line. It's fine. It is not fine. Draco." Her own voice surprised her. It came out tired, not angry. She would almost have preferred angry. "Please don't." He turned then, just his head, just enough for her to see the grey of his eyes in the candlelight, and whatever he had been about to say died between his teeth. He looked at her as though she was standing on the other side of a window he could not open. He looked at her the way he used to look at his father across the breakfast table, years ago, when he had been a boy and he had still been trying. "As you wish," he said. He turned back to his cloak. He hung it with care on the stand by the door. He smoothed the shoulders of it. He was, Hermione realized with a small sick lurch in her chest, buying time. He was not ready to go upstairs with her. He did not know what to do with her tonight, and so he was fussing with his cloak as though the fate of the evening depended on the drape of the velvet. Something inside her, some small taut wire that had been holding for months, gave. "I'm going to sleep in the blue room tonight." The words were out before she had decided to say them. They hung in the air of the great hall, small and terribly clear, and for a long moment the only sound was the tick of the long case clock by the staircase and the soft settle of a log in the far-off library fire. Draco did not move. His hand stayed on the shoulder of his cloak. "The blue room," he repeated, as though he were translating a phrase from a language he had not spoken in a long time. "Yes. It hasn't been aired." "It has. I asked Tibby yesterday." Another long pause. Still, he did not turn. She could see only the line of his back and the very small, very precise way his fingers had curled into the velvet of the cloak, making a fist that he would not let himself clench. "I see," he said. That was all. She had not known what she wanted him to say. She was aware, with a sudden, terrible clarity, that some part of her had been waiting for him to stop her, to turn around and say, "Don't," to cross the hall and take her face in his hands the way he had, once, in the first winter of their marriage, when she had tried to leave a room during a row, and he had caught her at the door and said, "No, Hermione. No, not like this. We do not do this. She had not known until this moment how much she had been waiting for that man to come back. He did not turn around. "Good night, then," he said to the cloak. "Good night." She climbed the stairs slowly. Her gown whispered against the marble. The portraits on the landing, generations of pale, narrow-faced Malfoys, watched her pass with a particular cool attention they reserved for her, the one who did not belong to them, the one who had nevertheless come to stay. She did not look at any of them. She had learned long ago not to give them the courtesy of her eyes. The blue room was at the end of the east corridor. It had been a guest room in Narcissa's time. Pale silk on the walls, a carved bed with silver hangings, a small writing desk under the window that overlooked the yew walk. Hermione had used it as a private library in the first year of her marriage, before she had felt settled enough to spread her books through the rest of the house. There were still shelves of her things in the corner. A volume of Rilke, a battered copy of Persuasion she had not opened in a long time. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, and for a moment she did not move. The rain was louder here, closer, drumming against the tall windows. A single candle burned on the writing desk. Tibby had been in then and lit one for her, the way elves did when they sensed a night was going to be difficult. The flame was very steady. It threw a soft gold circle onto the pale carpet, and outside that circle, the room lay in a dim blue hush. She looked at the bed. It had been turned down, a single coverlet, a single pillow plumped. The sight of it, the neat small provision for a single body, caught her somewhere under the ribs, and she pressed the flat of her hand hard against the door behind her, and breathed and breathed and did not cry. Down the corridor, 2 doors and a lifetime away, she heard Draco's footsteps climb the stairs. She heard them reach the landing. She heard them stop. For a long moment, there was nothing. Only the rain and the small tick of the candle flame, and the slow, heavy stillness of the great house holding its breath around them. Then the footsteps turned, not toward the master bedroom, not toward her, and went the other way, down the long west corridor, toward the room he had used as a boy. She heard, very faintly, a door open and close. Hermione slid slowly down the door until she was sitting on the pale carpet, her black silk gown pooling around her like spilled ink. She looked at the single candle on the desk, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, that she did not know how they were going to come back from this. She did not know if they were going to come back from this at all. Across the house, in a bedroom he had not slept in since he was 17, Draco Malfoy stood in the dark by the window. He had not lit a candle. He did not trust his hands with the match. He stood very still, with his forehead pressed against the cold glass, and he watched the rain smear the lights of the manor into long gold wounds. And in the pocket of his waistcoat, his fingers had closed, quite without his permission, around the small silver thing he had carried there for 3 years. His wedding ring. He had taken it off in the carriage. He did not remember doing it. He only knew that his hand had felt bare all the way up the drive, and that he could not, now, seem to make himself put it back on. The blue room woke her at 6, pale with a light that had no colour in it yet. For a long moment, Hermione did not remember where she was. The ceiling above her was wrong, too low, panelled in something paler than the walnut she knew, and the pillow beneath her cheek smelled of lavender and cedar instead of the bergamot soap Draco used, the soap she had come to know better than her own skin. Then she saw the carved silver hangings, and the memory of the evening came back to her in one slow, cold wave, and she lay very still under the coverlet and waited for it to pass. It did not pass. It settled in her chest like sediment. She sat up. The black silk gown hung over the back of the writing chair, where she had stepped out of it at some hour of the night she could not now recall. She reached for her dressing gown, the grey cashmere, one of Draco's first gifts to her, given without ceremony one October morning, when she had come down to breakfast shivering in a woolen wrap, and wrapped herself in it, and the scent of him came up from the collar, and she had to sit down on the edge of the bed for a moment before she could trust her legs. By the door, on the small lacquered tray where Tibby left Morning Post, a single cream envelope waited. No letter, no note. Only her own handwriting on the front, Draco, and the small neat wax seal she had pressed there 9 days ago, unbroken. She had forgotten it. No, that was a lie, and she had resolved somewhere in the small hours of the night not to lie to herself any more, not even about the small things. She had not forgotten it. She had written it 9 days ago on an afternoon when the rain had been coming in sideways across the yew walk, and she had sat at this very desk with a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. And she had written out in her careful barrister's hand every reason she could think of that a clean parting might be kinder than a slow ruin. She had sealed it. She had put it into the top drawer of the desk under a stack of ministry correspondence. She had told herself she would decide later whether to give it to him. She had not given it to him. She had not torn it up either. It had lived in the drawer like a small dark animal, and she had gone on pouring his tea in the mornings, and some nights she had almost forgotten it existed, and some nights she had lain awake feeling the weight of it 3 rooms away. Now it sat on the tray by the door, and someone had taken it out of the drawer, and someone had put it there. Hermione did not move for a long time. She sat on the edge of the bed in the grey cashmere and looked at the cream envelope across the room, and she went through the possibilities with the slow, methodical care she brought to any problem that frightened her. Tibby did not open drawers. Tibby had a horror of private papers. She had wept once in the early days when Hermione had asked her to sort some correspondence and had not been able to bring herself to touch the letters even after Hermione had released her from the prohibition. The elves would not have moved it, which meant Draco had been in this room. He had been in this room while she slept, or before she arrived, or at some thin, small hour of the night when the house had been asleep around them. He had come in, and he had gone to the desk. He knew which drawer. Of course, he knew which drawer. She kept all her private papers in the top left. He had watched her do it 1,000 times. And he had taken out the envelope, and he had, at some point, opened it. The seal was unbroken. She crossed the carpet on bare feet and picked the envelope up and turned it over in her hands. The wax was whole. The small crest she had pressed into it, not the Malfoy crest, a simple sprig of rosemary she had used for her own correspondence since she was 19, was unbroken and clean. He had not read it. He had found it. He had recognized what it was, and he had put it here, on the tray, where she could not pretend she did not know that he knew. Hermione sat down on the carpet with the letter in her lap, and for the first time since the war, she did not know what to do. Draco was in the breakfast room when she came down. He was standing by the long window that looked out onto the terrace, with a cup of black coffee in his hand, and the Morning Prophet folded unread on the table behind him. He had not sat down. He had the air of a man who had been standing there a long time and who had decided at some point that sitting would require a decision he was not prepared to make. He turned when he heard her step. He was dressed for the ministry. Dark grey, the waistcoat she had given him last Christmas, his hair combed back from his forehead with the particular severity he used on the days he expected the day to test him. His face was very still. The skin beneath his eyes was bruised with sleeplessness, and a small muscle worked once in his jaw when he saw her and was stilled. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She went to the sideboard. Her hands, she was pleased to notice, did not shake as she poured her tea. She added milk. She did not add sugar. She turned and carried the cup to the table and sat down in her usual place. And across the room she felt, rather than saw, Draco set his coffee down on the windowsill and come to the table and take his own chair, the one opposite hers, the one he had sat in every morning of their marriage. Neither of them spoke. Tibby had laid the table for two, as she did every morning, with the cold meats Draco preferred, and the soft boiled eggs Hermione had grown used to, and a rack of toast gone faintly cool, and the small bowl of raspberry preserve that was only there because Draco had, in the second month of their marriage, discovered that Hermione liked it, and had never since allowed a morning to pass without it. The raspberries this morning had been glossed with something, syrup or a fresh spoon of preserve laid over the old, and Hermione looked at the small crystal bowl of them and felt, absurdly, as though she might cry. "The Trevelyan brief," Draco said into the silence. You said yesterday you wanted to look at it before the 11 o'clock. I'll manage. You were up late. So were you." He did not answer that. He picked up his coffee cup and set it down again without drinking. His ring finger, she noticed, she could not help noticing, was bare. Her own ring was still on her hand. She had not taken it off. She did not think she would have known how. "Hermione!" "Don't." The word came out sharper than she had meant, and she saw him flinch. A very small thing, only the faintest tightening at the corner of his mouth. And she set her cup down on the saucer with exaggerated care, and pressed her fingertips against the rim of the table, and made herself breathe. "I am sorry," she said more quietly. I am not prepared to do this over breakfast. No." His voice was low. "No, of course. Forgive me." He stood. He had not eaten. He picked up the prophet from the table with hands that were, she saw now, not as steady as he wished them to be, and he folded it once more under his arm, and he looked down at her for one long second with an expression she could not read, something older than anger, something quieter than grief. And then he inclined his head in the small formal way he reserved for people he did not trust himself to speak to. "I'll be at the ministry until 7. If you need—" He stopped. He began again. "Tibby knows where I am." "Thank you." He went to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. For a moment she thought he might turn. She thought he might cross the room and say the thing he had come down this morning intending to say, the thing she could feel now, hanging in the air between them like ozone after a hex. She thought he might at last ask her the question. He did not turn. "The raspberries," he said to the doorframe, "are from the south garden. Tibby picked them yesterday. She asked me if you were... Well, I said you were." He left. Hermione sat at the table with the small bowl of raspberries in front of her, and she looked at them for a very long time. The sun had come round now through the tall east windows, and it lay across the white cloth in long pale stripes, and one of those stripes fell across the crystal bowl and made the raspberries glow as though they were lit from inside. She did not eat them. She could not. She worked through the morning in her study. She did not work well. The Trevelyan brief lay open on her desk, and she read the same paragraph 4 times without taking any of it in. And at last she set her quill down and pushed back her chair and sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the portrait above the fireplace. It was a wedding portrait, not the formal one that hung in the long gallery, she and Draco stiff as figures on a cake, Narcissa's choice of composition, but a small informal oil a friend had done for them as a gift from a sketch made at the reception. In it, Hermione was laughing. Draco was not. He was looking at her, and the painter had caught something in his face that Hermione had, at the time, not quite believed in. A look of such unguarded astonishment, such naked and grateful disbelief, that she had made the painter swear never to show the sketch to anyone else. She had hung the finished portrait in her own study because she could not bear to share it with the house. She looked at the painted Draco now, the bare wonder in his painted face, and she thought about the man who had stood this morning by the window with his ring off and his coffee cooling in his hand, and she did not know how one had become the other. She did not know if she had watched it happen and simply failed to see. She did not know if she had been herself half of the undoing. There was a knock at the study door. She straightened. "Come." It was Tibby, twisting a tea towel between her small grey fingers, her enormous eyes fixed on the carpet. "Mistress, the master, he has left a thing for Mistress. He said Tibby was to bring it when Mistress was not busy, and Tibby does not know if Mistress is busy, but I'm not busy. Thank you, Tibby." The elf held out a small flat parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with a length of waxed string. She laid it on the edge of the desk as though it were hot, and bowed, and vanished with the small soft displacement of air that always made Hermione's throat catch. Hermione looked at the parcel for a long moment before she touched it. She untied the string. She folded back the paper. Inside lay a book, very old, bound in faded green cloth, the spine worn nearly smooth. Persuasion. Her own copy, the battered one from the blue room shelf. She had not thought he knew she had it. Tucked into the flyleaf was a single piece of paper. His handwriting, that spare, upright script she would have known anywhere, a hand that had signed 1,000 ministry documents and 1 marriage register, and had written her, in the first year of their courting, a letter a week that she still kept in a cedar box under her side of the bed. 3 lines only. "I have not read yours. I will not unless you give it to me yourself. I left the light on in the library, in case you cannot sleep. D. Hermione read the note twice. She set it down on the desk. She pressed her fingertips very hard against her eyes, and she did not let herself cry, because if she began now, she would not stop, and there was still a long day to be got through, and a longer night. And she had, she realized, not yet decided anything at all. Outside, beyond the study window, the rain had begun again. It fell slow and grey through the yew walk, and somewhere deeper in the house, very faintly, she heard a door close. The owl came at 4:30, just as the rain was beginning to thin. Hermione was in the drawing room when it arrived. She had abandoned the study and the Trevelyan brief, and brought her work down to the small green settee by the fire, telling herself the change of room might shake something loose in her head. It had not. She had read the same affidavit 3 times. She had drunk 2 cups of tea grown stone cold at her elbow. She had listened, without meaning to, for footsteps in the hall. The owl tapped at the tall French window with the peremptory authority of a bird that had been here before. Narcissa's owl. A great pale eagle owl named Castor, with eyes like 2 small yellow lamps, who had brought, over the past 3 years, every summons Hermione had ever received from her mother-in-law, each one written on the same ivory stock, in the same delicate copperplate hand. Hermione let him in. He shook the rain from his wings with a small contemptuous air and held out his leg. The note was, as always, very short. "My dear, if you are at liberty, I should be grateful for half an hour of your time this afternoon. I will be in the White Parlour at 5 N.M. At liberty." Narcissa's phrasing never altered. It was the phrasing of a woman who had been summoning other women to her private rooms since she was 20, and who did not believe in the possibility of refusal, and who would have died rather than phrase a command as one. Hermione sat down on the edge of the settee with the note in her hand, and she thought, quite clearly, she knows. Of course she knew. The manor was Narcissa's before it was anyone's. She had moved to the dower house at Wiltshire 2 years ago, a gesture of tact that had surprised Hermione and moved her in ways she had not quite known how to repay. But the house still spoke to Narcissa through 100 small channels. A word from the housekeeper, a glance from Tibby, the absence of a breakfast eaten, Draco's face, perhaps at some chance meeting in Diagon Alley this morning. She would have needed very little. Hermione folded the note in half. She folded it in half again. She pressed the crease flat with her thumb, and then she went upstairs to change. The White Parlour was at the far end of the dower house, and it was the room Narcissa used for conversations she did not intend to have overheard. It had pale silk walls the colour of skimmed milk, and long windows that looked west over the park, and a single vase of white roses that was refreshed every morning by an elf who had served the Black family for 6 generations. The fire was lit. The tea was laid. Narcissa rose when Hermione came in. She was in soft dove grey, a shade she had taken to wearing since Lucius's death the year before last. Her pale hair was coiled low at her nape, and she wore, as she always wore, the single pearl on a thin platinum chain that Draco had given her for her 40th birthday. She crossed the carpet and took both of Hermione's hands in hers, and kissed her once on each cheek, the way she had done from the first day. "My dear, you are very good to come. Sit down, sit down. Letty has made the lapsang you like." Thank you. Hermione sat. She took the offered cup. She had learned, over 3 years, to accept Narcissa's hospitalities without resisting them, because resistance was a language Narcissa had been fluent in since the cradle, and Hermione could not hope to win a conversation conducted on those terms. Better to sit, better to take the tea, better to wait. Narcissa waited a small, decent interval. She asked after the Trevelyan case. She remarked on the rain. She said something mild and pleasant about a letter she had had from Andromeda. She did all of this while pouring her own tea with the slow, unhurried grace of a woman who had, Hermione realized with a small jolt, been preparing this conversation since before Hermione arrived. Then Narcissa set the pot down. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked up, and the pale blue of her eyes was very direct and very tired and very kind. Hermione, how long has my son been sleeping in his boyhood bedroom? Hermione's teacup did not tremble in her hand. She was proud of that later when she thought of it. Her teacup was perfectly still, held at the exact angle it had been held at a moment before, as though the question had not been asked. "One night," she said. "Ah. How did you know?" "Tibby came to me this morning." Narcissa's mouth moved into something that was not quite a smile. She was in great distress. She felt, I think, that she could not go to either of you. I have told her she was quite right to come. She's very fond of you both." "I see. My dear." Narcissa's voice changed. It went softer, and at the same time something in it sharpened, the way a thread sharpens when it is pulled taut. "I am not going to ask you what has happened. You will tell me if you wish to, or you will not. But I am going to ask you one thing, and I would be very grateful if you would think before you answer. Yes. Do you still love him?" The fire made a small collapsing sound in the grate. Outside the tall windows, the rain had given up altogether, and a cold, pale sun had come out over the park and was lying in long bands across the frosted grass. Hermione looked at Narcissa Malfoy, a woman who had once watched her across a drawing room in the war and pronounced the word Potter with perfect indifference while her son's life hung on the answer. And she felt, absurdly, that she was safer here than she had been anywhere all day. "Yes," she said. "Then I must tell you some things you may not want to know." Narcissa reached for a small rosewood box on the table at her elbow. She unlocked it with a tap of her wand. She took out a folded paper, thicker than a letter, older with the particular cream-brown cast of document vellum, and she laid it on the low table between them, and she pushed it with one pale finger a small distance toward Hermione. "What is this?" "Read it, my dear." Hermione picked it up. It was a deed, a transfer deed, drafted in the formal hand of the Malfoy family solicitor, dated 3 years and 2 months ago, 6 weeks before her wedding. By its terms, Draco Lucius Malfoy had renounced, in perpetuity and without condition, his right of inheritance to the Malfoy estates at Toulouse, at Salzburg, and at the small island of Skiathos in the Aegean, his seat on the board of Gringotts, his claim to the family vault at the Wiltshire branch of the bank, accepting only the portion designated by his mother's jointure, and his hereditary voting rights at the Wizengamot. The document had been signed by Draco. It had been witnessed by 2 solicitors Hermione did not know. It had been countersigned at the foot by Lucius. Hermione read it twice. "I don't understand," she said, and her voice came out a little thin. These are half the family holdings. Rather more than half. But why?" Narcissa's hands were folded in her lap. She was looking at them and not at Hermione, and her voice when she spoke was very level. "My husband," she said, "did not consent to your marriage. You know this. He was civil to you because I required it of him, and because Draco had threatened, a number of things. It does not matter now. But he did not consent. He summoned Draco to his study 6 weeks before the wedding. He told him that if he married you, he would be cut out of the principal estates. Draco did not argue. He did not attempt to dissuade his father. He asked only for a quill, and he signed this deed that same afternoon before Lucius could think better of having offered the terms. He never... Hermione stopped. She could not find the end of the sentence. "He never told me. No, he asked me not to tell you. He asked me, specifically, never to allow you to learn of it from anyone," he said. "Forgive me, my dear, these are his words. That he did not wish you to carry the weight of what he had chosen to give up. He said it was not a gift to you. He said it was a thing he had done for himself, and that it would poison your peace to know of it, and that if he ever discovered you had been told, he would not forgive the telling." Hermione set the deed down on the table. She set it down very carefully, the way she would have set down something that might break. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because." Narcissa's voice was still very level, but something had gone into it now, some small iron thing that Hermione had heard in it only once or twice before, always on Draco's behalf. "Because my son came to see me yesterday after the ministry dinner. He did not come in. He stood in the drive for a quarter of an hour in the rain, and then he turned his horse around and rode home. Letty saw him from the upstairs window. She came and woke me." "Oh?" "He has been thin for a year, Hermione. He has been quiet for longer. I have held my tongue because he is a grown man, and my interference has never served him well. And because, my dear, you must understand, you must, because I trust you with him. I trust you with him as I have never trusted anyone. But last night, he stood in my drive in the rain and did not come in. And this morning Tibby came to me weeping, and I find I am no longer able to hold my tongue." Narcissa leaned forward. She took Hermione's hand in both of her own. Her fingers were very cool and very thin. "I am not telling you this to reproach you. I am telling you because he will not. He will never tell you. He has decided, in that careful, terrible way he has, that love is a thing you prove by silence, and he has been proving it at you for 3 years, and I think it is killing you both. I think you did not know the shape of what he gave up, because he did not wish you to know, and I think you have been standing in the wreckage of his choices and calling it his indifference." Hermione could not speak. "He is so like his father in some ways," Narcissa said, and for the first time her voice trembled. "Not in the ways the world sees. In this one way. He does not know how to ask. He does not know how to say, 'I have bled for you. Please do not leave me.' He will stand in a drive in the rain and turn around and go home, and he will sleep in his boyhood bedroom, and he will put your letter back on your tray unopened, and he will believe, until the day he dies, that this is what it means to love you well. He He told you about the letter. He did not have to. Tibby saw him leave your room this morning. She told me because she did not know what else to do. Hermione sat with Narcissa Malfoy's thin, cool hands around her own, and she looked at the deed on the table, the signatures, the witness seals, the small date in Draco's upright hand, a date that fell 6 weeks before he had stood beside her at an altar and said, "I will," in a voice that had, she remembered now, broken very slightly on the second word. And she understood, with a clarity that felt almost like physical pain, that she had been married for 3 years to a man she had, in some crucial respect, never quite met. "Go home, my dear," Narcissa said. "Go home to my son. I am not telling you what to say to him. I do not know what to say to him. I have never known. But go home." Hermione rose. Her legs, she discovered, were not quite steady. She did not trust herself to speak. At the door of the parlour she turned. "Narcissa." "Yes, my dear." "Thank you." Narcissa only inclined her head, very slightly, in the small formal way her son had inclined his that morning in the breakfast room, and Hermione understood that she had just been given a gift she would not, for a long time, know how to repay. She went out through the hall. Letty opened the front door for her. The cold, pale sun was going down over the park, laying long red bands across the frost, and the Dower House carriage stood waiting for her on the gravel, and the coachman handed her in without a word. The Manor was lit when she came up the drive. Every window burned. The great hall stood open, warm and gold against the failing day, and Hermione stepped down from the carriage with her hand in her pocket. Her fingers closed around the folded deed that Narcissa had pressed into her palm at the parlour door, and she walked up the steps of her own house for the first time in 3 years, with her heart in her throat and her resolve, at last, set hard. Somewhere inside, she knew Draco was waiting for her, though he would not call it that. He would be in the library, because the library was where he had told her he would leave the light on. He would have a book open on his knee. He would not be reading it. She crossed the hall. She went to the library door. She raised her hand to open it, and for one long-held moment she did not. The library door gave under her palm without a sound. Draco had oiled the hinges himself, years ago, in a fit of domestic exactness that had amused her at the time. He could not bear, he had said, the small whining complaint of old brass, not in this room of all rooms. She had teased him for a week. He had borne the teasing with the small dry patience he reserved for her mockery alone, and the hinges had never sung again. They did not sing now. She pushed the door, and the library opened to her in its long hush of leather and lamp oil and old paper, and there he was. He sat in the wing chair by the fire, not the reading chair, not his usual one, but the other, the one she favoured, the high-backed one with the worn velvet she had loved from her first week in this house. He had a book open on his knee. He was not reading it. The fire had burned low. He had not fed it. A single lamp was lit on the table at his elbow, and its light fell on the side of his face and made the line of his jaw look sharper than it was, and older. He did not rise when she came in. He did not startle. He only closed the book very slowly with the flat of his hand, and he looked up at her across the long red carpet, and his eyes in the lamplight were the colour of rained-on slate. "You saw my mother. How did you—" Letty sent Castor. He went to her first, then here. She wanted me to know you were coming." His mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile. "She does not think me capable of being surprised kindly. She is, as usual, correct." Hermione did not move from the doorway. She stood with her hand still on the brass of the door handle, and she looked at him, at the man her husband had been all day, all year, at the shape he had made of himself in her absence, and she felt the folded deed in her pocket like a coal. "Draco, please, do not." He said it quietly. He had not raised his voice in this house in a long time. He did not raise it now. "Whatever she told you, please do not ask me to defend it. I find I am very tired tonight, Hermione, and I do not think I can." "She told me about the deed." He went still. It was not the stillness of a man bracing himself. It was the stillness of a man whose last rope has just been cut and who is waiting, very politely, to see how far the fall will be. "Ah," he said. That was all. "Draco, it wasn't hers to tell." "No, it wasn't yours to keep." He looked down at the book in his lap. His hand, the long pale hand she had held at an altar, the hand that had braided her hair once, drunk on a summer night in Salzburg, before the Salzburg estate had been a thing renounced, spread flat on the leather of the cover, and the knuckles whitened and then relaxed, and she watched him decide, with the small cold deliberation he used on himself, not to feel whatever he was feeling. "It was done before we married," he said. "It has nothing to do with—" "Don't. Hermione, don't do that." Her voice came out louder than she had meant. She shut the door behind her and crossed the carpet and stopped on the other side of the hearth from him, and her hands were shaking now, shaking in the way they had not shaken at Narcissa's, and she pressed them flat against her sides and made herself breathe. "Don't stand there and tell me in that solicitor's voice that it has nothing to do with us. Toulouse, Salzburg, Skyathos, your seat at the Wizengamot, Draco. You signed it 6 weeks before our wedding. You never told me. You asked your mother never to tell me." "Yes." "Why?" He set the book on the small table at his elbow. He did it with great care, aligning the spine with the edge of the wood, as though the placement of the book were the one thing in this room he could still control. Then he stood. He stood the way he had stood all his life, straight-backed, hands at his sides, chin lifted very slightly, the posture of a boy who had been taught from the age of 4 that a Malfoy did not flinch. And he looked at her across the hearth-rug with an expression she had only ever seen on his face once, long ago, in the white drawing-room of this same house, on a spring afternoon, the year she had turned 18. "Because," he said, "I did not want you to marry a man who had bought you with what he gave up." "Draco, no. You have asked. You will hear me." His voice was still low, still very level, but something had broken open in it now, some thin seam that had been holding since the morning, perhaps since the morning 6 weeks before their wedding, when he had walked out of his father's study with a quill in his hand. "If I had told you, you would have. You are who you are, Hermione. You would have carried it. You would have sat in this house and looked at the walls and thought, 'He gave up Salzburg for me.' You would have thought, every time the prophet wrote something filthy about us, every time some pure-blood woman turned her shoulder at a ball, he gave up his Wizengamot seat for me. You would have begun, eventually, to balance it. You would have begun to keep a ledger, and I could not. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against his mouth for one short second, and then took it away and went on. I could not have you love me because you were grateful. I could not have that be the shape of it. I would rather you. I would rather you. Rather, I what? Rather you never knew. And when I found out? What then, Draco? What were you going to do when I found out, as I was always going to find out? Because we live in a world where nothing stays buried, and your mother has a conscience, and I am not a stupid woman. I was going to be dead, he said. The word fell into the room and lay there. The fire sank another inch in the grate. Somewhere very far away, at the far end of the east wing, a clock began to strike the hour and stopped after 2 chimes, as though it had lost its own count. Hermione stared at him. What? Not by my own hand. He said it very quickly, as though he had heard the shape of it from her side and was hurrying to correct it. I do not mean, Hermione, no. I mean only that I did not expect to live a very long time. I had arranged my life with the understanding that the men who knew what I had done in the war were patient men, and that I was not, perhaps, a man whose health would hold out forever. And I had decided that by the time you were old enough, or free enough, or simply far enough from me to think clearly, I would not be there for you to ask. That was the arrangement. In my own head, I had made my peace with it. You what? I was wrong about it. He said it as though confessing a small error in arithmetic. I did not die. You see, here I still am. And so the arrangement has... Stop. Hermione! Stop it. She did not know she was crossing the hearthrug until she had crossed it. She did not know she was going to touch him until her hands were on the lapels of his waistcoat, fisted in the grey wool, and she was shaking him, or trying to. He was taller than her, and heavier, and he only swayed very slightly under her hands, and did not step back, did not catch at her wrists, did not do anything at all but look down at her with an expression of such complete, stricken attention that she almost, for a moment, could not bear it. You were planning on dying, she said. Her voice was not quite her own. You married me, planning on dying. Planning is rather a strong word. Don't you dare be clever at me. No, not now, not about this. No. His hands came up slowly, as though he were afraid she would bolt. They closed very lightly around her wrists, not to pull her away, only to steady her, to hold the trembling of them, and she felt through the thin linen of her sleeves the cold, precise touch of his fingers, and she realized he was not wearing his ring. And she realized a moment later that neither was she sure he had not been wearing it in his pocket all day, and some small thing in her chest cracked along a line she had not known was there. Hermione, please. He had gone quite white. She could see the small tremor in his lower lip. He had never been able to school, the one he had always hated, the one that gave him away. Please, let me. I need to... What? I need to say this badly. I am going to say it badly. Please do not. Do not walk out of the room while I am trying. I am not going anywhere. No, I know. I know you aren't. That is why I... He drew a breath. He let it out. The breath was not steady. I have been sleeping in the west room because I could not bear to come to our bed and lie there next to you and feel you thinking I am trapped. I have been letting go of your arm at ministry dinners because I have seen the way they look at you when I hold it, and I could not bear to be the thing that made it worse. I have been. I have been very quiet. I know I have been very quiet, and I thought if I was quiet enough, if I took up little enough room, you would have space to choose, to go if you needed to stay if you could. And every day I have watched you choosing to stay, and I have not understood it, Hermione. I have not for one single day understood why you have stayed, and I have been so frightened of being the thing that made you stop. Draco. I found the letter this morning. I did not mean to. Tibby was putting away your correspondence, and the drawer was open, and I saw my name in your hand, and I thought... He stopped. He had to stop. His throat worked. I thought, oh, there it is. She has written it at last. I have been waiting for this letter for 3 years, and here it is, and I will be a gentleman about it. I will give her the courtesy of the door. And I took it out of the drawer, and I went to read it. And I could not open it. I thought if she wanted me to read it, she would have given it to me. If it is still in a drawer, it is still something she has not decided. And I put it on the tray by the door because I wanted you to know that I knew. I could not bear to pretend I did not know. But I could not read it without your leave. Hermione, I could not. I am telling you this badly. I am so sorry. I'm telling you this. Shut up. He shut up. Her hands were still fisted in his lapels. His hands were still very light around her wrists. The fire had sunk to a low red eye in the grate. Outside, beyond the tall library windows, the rain had begun again, slow and patient, a steady, soft percussion on the old glass. The letter, Hermione said. Yes. I wrote it on a bad afternoon. Yes. I was not going to send it. I have not, for 8 of the last 9 nights, been going to send it. On the 9th night, last night, I was so tired, Draco. I was so tired, and you would not look at me, and I thought... Her voice broke. She let it break. I thought... He does not want me here. He has not wanted me here for a long time. I am staying in the house of a man who will not look at me, and I am becoming a small cold thing, and if I do not leave, I will forget how to be warm. I thought that. And then I walked out of the dining room, and you did not stop me. You did not stop me, Draco. You stood in the hall, and you let me take a candle to the blue room. I thought. I know what you thought. I know now. That is why I am telling you what I thought. She swallowed. We have been very stupid. Both of us. Haven't we? Yes, he said. Yes, I think we have. She let go of his lapels. She did not step back. She slid her hands instead up the front of his waistcoat, slowly, carefully, the way one approaches an animal that has been hurt, and she laid her palms flat against his chest, one over his heart, one a little higher, at the base of his throat, where the starched collar ended and the bare skin began. He made a small sound. She felt it, more than heard it, under her right hand. She did not look up at him. She was not quite ready to look up at him. She looked instead at her own hands on his chest, at the small, pale shape of her ring on her left hand, and at the bare 4th finger of his right, the finger his ring had lived on for 3 years. Where is it? She said. What? Your ring. A long pause, then very quietly, my waistcoat pocket. Give it to me. He did not move for a moment. Then, carefully, as though his hand had to be told each separate thing to do, he reached into the small pocket at the left of his waistcoat, and he took out the ring. It was warm from his body. He laid it in her palm without a word. Hermione closed her fingers around it. She did not give it back. Not yet. She looked up, at last, into her husband's face. At the grey of his eyes, red-rimmed now, at the small muscles still working in his jaw, at the bare white line where the ring had sat. And she said, very steadily, "Upstairs. Not the blue room. Not the west room. Our room. Do you understand me, Draco?" "Yes." "We are going to sit on our own bed, and we are going to talk, and we are going to stop dying at each other. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Come." She did not let go of his hand. He did not let go of hers. She led him out of the library, through the gold-lit hall, up the great staircase under the eyes of his ancestors, who watched them go without a word. They did not, in the end, sit on the bed. She had meant to. She had climbed the stairs with her hand in his, and a whole small, neat architecture of a conversation built up inside her head. We will sit, we will face each other, we will begin at the beginning. But when she pushed open the door of the master bedroom, she stopped on the threshold and could not go in. The room was as she had left it the morning before. The bed was made. Tibby had laid a small sprig of dried rosemary on her pillow, the way Tibby always did when she sensed a difficult night. The curtains were drawn back. The 2 reading lamps on the bedside tables were lit, both of them, as they were lit every night of her marriage. Draco on the left, she on the right, each small golden pool waiting for an occupant. And the sight of them burning for no one struck her. Somewhere she did not know she had been soft. She stood in the doorway with his hand in hers, and she did not move. "Hermione." A moment. He waited. He was very good at waiting. He had always been good at it, and she had always hated it and loved it in equal measure, the small patient way he had of standing beside her while she worked out whatever she needed to work out. He did not tug at her hand. He did not speak again. He only stood at her shoulder and breathed, and the breath of him stirred the small fine hairs at her temple, and after a long minute she said, without turning, "Not the bed. All right. The window seat. All right." They went to the window seat. It was a wide, deep recess under the east casement. 3 cushions in pale grey wool, a view over the rose garden that had, in winter, nothing to offer but bare thorn and a long, soft, unbroken fall of new snow. She sat down in her corner. He sat down in his. There was a little space between them, the small measured space of 2 people who were not quite sure whether to touch. On the low sill between them, Tibby had left, at some point in the day unbidden, a small glass decanter of the pale brandy Draco kept for grave occasions, and 2 cut crystal glasses and a folded white napkin. Hermione looked at it and almost laughed. "Your elf," she said, "knows more about our marriage than we do. Tibby has a terrible gift for it. I have never been able to break her of it." He poured, because his hands wanted something to do. 2 small measures. He handed her one. Their fingers touched glass to glass and then skin to skin, and she did not let her fingers flinch away, and he did not let his withdraw. "I have always thought, you know, that the elves of a house know how it is going before anyone living in it does. Tibby brought me a second pillow last night. I had not asked for one." "Oh." She put it on the left side of the bed, very pointedly. Then she went away. A small sound came out of Hermione that she had not meant to let out, half a laugh, half something more ragged. She looked down at the brandy in her glass. The firelight from the bedroom hearth made a small amber mouth inside it. Draco. I need to ask you something, and I do not want you to be clever when you answer me. I do not want you to be gallant. I do not want you to be whatever it is you are being when you speak in that flat courtroom voice. I want you to answer me the way you used to answer me in Salzburg. There was a small pause. She watched him flinch very faintly around the eyes. Not at the request, she thought, but at the place name. Salzburg had been their honeymoon. Salzburg had been a month of warm stone balconies and late suppers on a terrace over the Salzach, and a Draco she had been married to for 3 weeks, who laughed at her own jokes before she had finished them, who had walked barefoot on wet marble at 2 in the morning, carrying 2 cups of chocolate, who had, on the last night, in the lamplight of a hotel bedroom, told her she was the only thing in his life that had not been arranged for him by someone else. Salzburg was one of the estates he had signed away 6 weeks before that honeymoon. She understood now why he had been so quiet on the train home. "I will try," he said. "The war." "Yes." "You said downstairs. You said the men who knew what you had done in the war were patient men." "Yes." "What did you mean?" He did not answer at once. He looked down into his brandy. The small amber mouth of it rocked slightly in the glass, and he turned the stem between his thumb and forefinger, and after a moment he set the glass down untasted on the sill. "There were 3 of them," he said. 2 are dead now. The third died last spring, in Azkaban, of what the healers called natural causes. I attended the inquest for the formality of it. There is no one left who knows what I did in the room of requirement on the night it burned. No one living. I have not told you this before because there was nothing to be done about it. It was a problem I carried alone because I could not ask anyone else to carry it, and because it was, in my view, mine to carry. But last spring, the last of them died, and I have been, Hermione, I have been since last spring rather at a loss. Do you understand? I had built my entire arrangement, as I called it, around the certainty that one of them would one day find me in an alley. I had worn it like a coat. It was a very warm coat. It was the only coat I had. And then last spring someone took it off me, and I did not know. I have not known for nearly a year what I am meant to do with the rest of a life. Hermione sat very still. "A year," she said. "Yes. That is when you stopped." "Stopped what?" "Looking at me." He went white again. He had gone white in the library. She had thought then she had seen the end of his being able to go any whiter. She had been wrong. He turned his face to the dark glass of the window, to the snow shape of the rose garden, and he said to the glass very quietly, "Yes, I suppose that is when. Because you suddenly had to plan for it, a life. Because I suddenly had to plan for you, a life with you in it that would not, very conveniently, end. A life in which I would have to be the husband you had married, and I had not, I think, ever truly believed I would have to be. A life in which you would grow old with me, and I would grow old with you, and the world would go on. Hermione, the world would go on doing what it does to us, and I would have to find some way every morning for 50 years of being the man who stood between you and it without making it worse. And I did not know how. I did not know how to do it. I panicked, very slowly, over 11 months. And I made myself smaller and smaller, and I did not know I was doing it. And one morning I came down to breakfast and I realized I had not looked you in the eye in, oh, a very long time. And I did not know how to start again. And I thought, if I start now, she will know that I stopped. And so I did not start. He turned his head. He looked at her. Looked, really looked, for what she thought might have been the first time in a year. And the grey of his eyes in the low light was terrible, bare, a man with nothing left in his pockets. "I have been a coward," he said. "Hermione, I have been a coward, and I have let you stand alone in a room I was also standing in, and I do not know how to ask you to forgive me. I do not think you should. I think you should take that letter you wrote 9 days ago, and I think you should give it to me, and I think... Stop. Hermione, I am going to tell you something now, and you are going to listen to me, Draco Malfoy, and you are not going to speak until I am done." "Yes." She set her glass down. She did not look away from his face. She slid across the space between them on the window seat. A small space, it turned out. It had only ever been a small space. And she took both of his hands in hers, and she held them tight, and she said, "I did not marry you because I was grateful. I did not marry you because you gave up Salzburg, which I did not know about, and I would not have married you for that anyway. And I am going to be furious with you about it in the morning. I will. Tomorrow I will be angry about Salzburg. But not tonight. Tonight, listen to me. I married you because on a Tuesday afternoon in the atrium of the ministry in the January after the war, you walked past me and you did not look away. Do you remember? Everyone was looking away from me that winter. Everyone was looking away from you. And we walked past each other, and you did not look away. You looked at me, Draco, as though you had been looking for me, and you nodded. Only nodded. You did not stop. You did not speak. And I walked into a lift, and I pressed the button for the 9th floor, and I stood there, and I thought, oh no, oh no, it is going to be him. I am telling you this because you do not know it. I have never told you. I married you because in the worst year of my life, a boy I had every right to hate looked at me in a corridor and did not pretend I was not there. That was Draco. That was the beginning. That was the whole of the beginning. Everything since has been a consequence of that. Do you understand me? He did not speak. He could not, she thought. His jaw was working in the way it had worked downstairs, and his hands in her hands had begun very faintly to tremble, and she held on. "I am not leaving," she said. "I have never been going to leave. The letter was a thing I wrote to see if I still believed any of the reasons when I wrote them down. I did not. I didn't send it because I didn't believe it. I should have burned it. I should have told you. I did not tell you, because I am also a coward, Draco. I am also a coward. I have been living in this house for a year, being too frightened to ask you why you would not look at me. And I have my share. I have my share of this. Do you understand? Yes. Say it. You have your share. Good." She lifted his hands, both of them, and she pressed them against her own cheeks, his palms flat to her jaw, his fingertips at her temples. And she closed her eyes. His hands were cold. They had been cold all day. She held them there until she felt the first slow human warmth come back into them from her skin. And then she opened her eyes and said, "You are going to put your ring back on now." "Yes." And I am going to put mine on your finger, because you do not get to do it yourself, Draco. Not after a year of whatever this was. You do not get to. I am doing it. Yes. She took the ring from the pocket of her dressing gown. She had been carrying it there since the library. She lifted his left hand in hers, and she slid the ring onto his finger, and it went back into its small worn groove as though it had never been away. And he made a sound, a small, raw sound, more breath than voice, that she would remember, she thought, for a very long time. Then, because she did not trust herself to speak any more, and because some things had to be said in a different language, she leaned forward across the last small space between them on the window seat, and she pressed her forehead against his. He made another sound. She felt his breath stutter against her mouth. His hands came up, slowly, carefully, as though he did not quite believe he was allowed, and they found her face and cradled it and held. They did not kiss. Not yet. Not tonight. She understood, without his having to tell her, that neither of them could bear it yet, that a kiss tonight would be a kind of flight from the terrible, tender work of what they had just begun. She held her forehead against his, and she breathed him in. Bergamot soap, the cold, clean trace of snow on wool, the familiar faint scent of parchment that clung always to his hair. And after a long time he said, very quietly against her mouth, "I am going to be better. I am going to try. I do not know if I will be... Draco. Tomorrow. We will begin tomorrow. Tonight, only hold on." Yes, he held on. Outside the tall window the snow had begun again, small and dry and very steady, falling through the yellow lamplight onto the bare thorn of the rose garden, and the manor around them held its long, slow breath. And in the hearth of the bedroom, the fire she had not fed in an hour gave out a single small collapsing sigh and settled deeper into its own red heart. Morning came pale and slow, a thin winter sun laying long bars of cold light across the foot of the bed. They had, in the end, slept. Not easily. Hermione had woken twice in the dark to find Draco awake beside her, lying on his back with his eyes open to the canopy, his hand resting on top of hers on the coverlet, not quite holding, not quite letting go. But they had slept. She had woken the last time to find him curled toward her at last, his forehead against her shoulder, his breath slow and warm through the linen of her nightgown, and she had lain very still so as not to wake him. And she had watched the ceiling go grey and then silver and then gold, and she had thought, "We are still here. We are still here. The house has not fallen down." Now the clock on the mantel said 7:30, and he was awake. She could tell without turning. His breathing had changed, and the small weight of his hand on her hip had grown deliberate, alert, a held thing. "Draco. What time are you at the ministry?" "I am not going to the ministry." "You have the Hartwell deposition at 10. Higgs will take it. Higgs is 23 and terrified of you. Then he will take it while terrified. Hermione." His voice was sleep-rough, low, turned into the fabric at her shoulder. "I am not leaving the house today. You may argue with me about it if you wish. You will not win." She did not argue. She turned carefully until she was facing him on the pillow, and his eyes were open and very grey in the morning light, and she reached up and pushed a fallen strand of his hair back from his forehead with the flat of her thumb. And he closed his eyes under the touch, the way a cat closes its eyes, slow, reverent, as though he did not quite trust that the hand would stay. "All right," she said. "All right. All right." They took breakfast in her study. Neither of them suggested the breakfast room. Neither of them had to. Tibby, who had, when Hermione had rung for her, appeared with her enormous eyes full of tears she refused to let fall and a fresh pot of coffee already in her hands, had carried a small tray through to the study without being asked, and had laid it on the low table by the fire, and had then stood for one long second looking at the two of them with such naked devotional relief that Hermione had had to look away. "Tibby, mistress, thank you for everything yesterday." Tibby had made a small strangled sound. Then she had vanished very abruptly with the particular pop elves used when they were about to weep in private. Draco, pouring coffee with both hands, had not looked up, but his mouth had moved in something that was almost a smile. They ate in the study because it was Hermione's room, because it had her books on the walls and her wedding portrait over the fireplace and her handwriting on every surface, and because, Hermione understood without anyone saying it, Draco needed to sit this morning in a room that was unambiguously hers. It was a small thing. He noticed small things. He always had. "The deed," she said, when the coffee was poured and the toast was between them, and she could not bear any longer to put it off. "We are going to talk about the deed now. Yes, you are going to reverse it." He set his cup down. "Hermione, no. Listen. Listen to me. I have been thinking about it all night while you were pretending to be asleep." "I was not pretending." "You were pretending. I could tell by the breathing." "Draco, listen. You gave those things up because you believed you were buying something. My being able to marry you without the weight of it. I understand why. I am not going to fight you about why. But it has been 3 years, and the purchase has not held. We have had the weight anyway. Only we have had it without the thing you thought you were trading it for. We have had the worst of both. So, we will have the estates back, please." "It is not as simple as that." "Nothing ever is. Draco, look at me. Is there a legal bar to reversing it?" A pause. Then grudgingly, "No, my father is dead. The deed was contingent in its terms on his enforcing it during his lifetime. On his death, the contingency lapsed. I have had, technically since the funeral, the right to petition Gringotts to restore the holdings." "Draco, I did not tell you, because I had not decided whether to do it. I did not want to do it alone. And I could not do it with you, because to do it with you, I would have had to tell you it existed. Yes, I see the shape of that. It is the shape everything has had for a year, isn't it? The same shape. Yes. No more, Draco. No more of this shape. You do not do anything alone any more that touches both of us. Do you understand me? Yes. Say it. I do not do anything alone any more that touches both of us. Good. She reached across the small table and she took his hand and she turned it palm up and she traced with the pad of her forefinger the small pale callus at the base of his ring finger, the one the ring had worn there over 3 years of wearing. He made a small sound. She kept tracing. We will go to Gringotts on Monday, she said. Together. We will petition for the restoration. You will have your seat at the Wizengamot back, because the Wizengamot needs a man with your conscience on it, whether or not either of you know it yet. We will have Salzburg back because I want to take you to Salzburg again. We will have Skyathos back because I do not know Skyathos Draco, and you have never taken me, and I should like to see it. Hermione. And Toulouse, because your mother loves the roses there. That is all the reason I need for Toulouse. He was not speaking. He was looking at her hand on his hand, and his face had gone through 3 separate things she could not read, and had arrived somewhere quieter than any of them. And after a long moment, he turned his hand under hers and closed his fingers around hers, and did not let go. "All right," he said. "All right. On one condition. You will be present at the signing. I do not sign anything to do with the estates again without you in the room. Ever. Any of it. Do you understand me, Hermione? This is my condition." She almost laughed. She almost wept. She did neither. She only lifted his hand to her mouth, and she kissed the ridge of his knuckles very lightly, and she said, "Yes, that is a good condition. I accept your condition." The article came in the afternoon post. Tibby brought the prophet through to the study at 3 o'clock, and she did not meet either of their eyes when she laid it on the table. She had folded it in half, badly, unlike her usual crisp quarter folds, and Hermione, who had been reading a book on the settee beside Draco with her stockinged feet tucked under his thigh, sat up at the sight of the folded paper, and knew, with a small cold lurch, that it was something. It was something. Malfoy matrimony on the rocks. Sources close to the couple speak. The byline was Rita Skeeter's, of course. It always was. The piece ran to 2 full columns. It described in the particular prose Skeeter reserved for women she had disliked since 1994, a ministry dinner at which Mrs. Malfoy Granger, the mudblood who bought a Malfoy, unquoted now but hovering above every line, had sat in stony silence while her husband, the visibly estranged heir of an ancient line, had declined to eat. It described the carriage ride home in detail Skeeter could not possibly have witnessed. It described, with small breathy relish, sources close to the Manor household, reporting that Mrs. Malfoy had been sleeping in a guest wing, and that the marriage, once the great scandal of the Reconstruction era, now appears to be following the trajectory predicted by its many critics. There was a photograph. It was of the 2 of them at the ministry dinner. Draco, in the middle of letting go of her elbow, his hand caught forever in the act of withdrawal. Her own face caught forever in the small held stillness of not flinching. Skeeter had chosen the frame with care. It was a photograph that said, "This marriage is over," without needing a caption. Hermione read it to the end. She read it twice. She set the paper down on her knee. Beside her, Draco had gone very still. It was the stillness she had seen in the library the night before, the stillness of a man waiting to see how far the fall would be. And she understood, before he spoke, that his first instinct was already forming, was already the old instinct, was already withdraw, protect her, make it worse elsewhere. She understood also that he was stopping himself. She could see the stopping in the small muscle of his jaw. She could see it in the way his hand, which had lifted half an inch from her ankle, came back down and rested there again, deliberate, decided. "Well," he said. His voice was not quite steady. "That is filthy, even by her standards. It is. I am sorry, Hermione. I am so sorry you have to... Draco. Yes, look at me. He looked. "This is the moment," she said quietly, "where you and I decide whether we are going to spend the next 40 years of our marriage apologizing to each other for the things other people say about us. Are we?" A long pause. "No," he said. "No. Good. Because I am not sorry. Are you sorry?" Not for anything she has written, no." "Then we will not apologize for it. To each other. Ever. Do you understand? We will be furious. We will be wounded. We will, I am sure, in private, in this room, grieve the way she has made it sound. But we will not apologize to each other for being the kind of married people the prophet writes this kind of thing about. That is my condition. You had a condition. That is mine. Yes." His voice had got very low. "Yes, Hermione, I accept your condition." "Good." She held out her hand. He took it. They sat for a long moment on her study settee, the prophet folded on the table, his thumb passing slowly back and forth across the small bones of her wrist, the fire making its small domestic sounds in the grate. The winter sun had moved round, and it was lying now on the carpet in long, pale stripes, and a single stripe fell across the toes of her stockinged feet, warming the wool. "Draco." "On Sunday." "I want to go to the borough." He went very still again. Not the old stillness. Not quite. Something newer. Something more careful. "Hermione." "Molly's birthday luncheon. I have been declining it for 3 years. You have never been invited. I want to go. I want to take you with me. I want us to sit in Molly Weasley's garden and eat her appalling trifle and be seen in public being married people. I want Harry to see. I want Ron to see. I want the world to see, Draco, that we are not following the trajectory Skeeter has predicted, that we are, in fact, ungovernable on this point. Molly will not have me in her house. Molly is Molly. She will be uncomfortable. She will be stiff for the first 10 minutes. She will, at the end of the afternoon, press a Tupperware of leftovers into your hands and tell you to eat more. This is what Molly does. She cannot help herself. I have seen her do it to a Death Eater's second cousin. She will do it to you. Hermione, will you come? A long silence. His thumb had stopped moving on her wrist. His eyes had gone somewhere she could not follow, and she sat and waited and let him go there. And after a time, he came back and looked at her, and there was something in his face she had not seen in a very long time. A small, wry, frightened thing that was almost a smile. "If Molly Weasley throws me out," he said, "I will not make it easy for her. I should hope not. I have standards about dignity. I know. I will be very stiff about it. I know you will. Hermione. I will come." She did not trust herself to speak. She lifted his hand instead, and she laid it flat against her cheek, and he sat on her study settee in the pale winter afternoon, with his palm against her face, and his wife's stockinged feet warm against his thigh, and he drew one long, uneven breath that was not, she thought, quite grief, and not, she thought, quite relief, but something newer than either. And outside the tall study windows, the winter sun went on falling through the bare yew walk in long, cold gold bars. And on the table between them, the folded prophet lay small and defeated, and already, she thought, already beginning to fade. Sunday came clear. The snow of the week had softened into a thin grey slush along the London roads and a brittle white crust in the Devon lanes, and the sky over Ottery St. Catchpole was the particular washed blue that comes only after a hard frost, high and pale and cold. They apparated to the top of the lane at 12. Hermione would not hear of the Manor carriage. One did not, she said, arrive at the Burrow in a carriage. One simply did not. And they walked the last quarter-mile hand in hand, past the frozen hedgerows and the long bare ash trees, and with every step Hermione felt Draco's grip on her fingers tighten, and then, carefully, relax. He had dressed very plainly. That had been a small decision all its own, conducted in the dressing room that morning with the slow, grim care of a man arming himself for a duel. No waistcoat. No cravat. A soft, dark jumper she had given him 2 Christmases ago and had never, to her knowledge, seen him wear, and the plainest of his winter coats, and a pair of boots that had mud on them. He had looked at himself in the glass and said very dryly, "Well, I look like a country solicitor." And she had crossed the dressing room and risen on her toes and kissed him for the first time on the corner of his mouth, a small, quick thing, barely a kiss at all. And she had said, "You look like my husband Draco. Come on." They stopped at the gate of the Burrow. The house rose above the orchard in its preposterous leaning glory, chimneys at every improbable angle, a new coat of whitewash on the eastern gable, the kitchen window open a crack and pouring out the smell of roasting goose and apple and something scorched that was probably the bread. Children were running in the garden. Hermione counted Teddy Lupin, hair a bright turquoise in the cold sun. 2 of Bill's girls, red gold heads bent over a hoop. A small person she thought must be Rose, though Rose had been a baby the last time Hermione had seen her, and was now, apparently, 5. A tabby cat she did not know watched from the woodshed roof. Draco looked at the gate. He did not open it. "Hermione." "Yes." "I do not know how to do this." "Neither do I, quite. We will do it badly together. Come." She lifted the latch. Molly saw them first. Of course she did. She had been watching the lane. Hermione could see it in the way Molly's head came up at the kitchen window, and in the small, quick wiping of her hands on her apron, and in the way she vanished from the window and appeared, not 10 seconds later, in the open kitchen door with her face doing something Hermione could not read from 20 yards. "Oh," Molly said. "Oh, Hermione, dear." She came down the path very fast. Her apron flags were flying. Hermione braced. For what, she did not know. For a scene, for a scolding, for a refusal at the door. And Molly Weasley reached her and took her by both shoulders and looked into her face for one hard second. And whatever Molly saw there made her mouth tighten and her eyes grow bright. And then Molly Weasley did a thing Hermione had not expected at all, which was that she let go of Hermione's shoulders and turned, very squarely, to Draco. "Mr. Malfoy." "Mrs. Weasley." "You will come into my kitchen, please. You will hang your coat on the 3rd hook, not the 2nd. The 2nd is Arthur's. He is very particular. And you will sit at the table, and you will eat what I give you, and you will not argue about the portions. Is that understood?" Draco opened his mouth. He closed it again. He inclined his head in the small, formal way he had been inclining it all his life, and he said, very carefully, "Yes, Mrs. Weasley." "Good." She did not smile. She did not embrace him. She did, however, pat him once, briskly, efficiently, as though testing a loaf, on the upper arm, and then she turned and marched back toward the house, and Hermione looked up at Draco and saw that his eyes were wet, very briefly, and that he was blinking, hard, and pretending he was not. "Come on," Hermione said softly. Yes. He hung his coat on the third hook. The luncheon was predictably chaos. There were 16 of them at the long table in the end. Arthur at the head, Molly at the foot, the children at a smaller table pulled up against the wall that was not. The children had been informed repeatedly to be approached with sticky hands. George at his usual bench with Angelina, Bill and Fleur across from them, Percy and Audrey arriving late and in disarray. Charlie over from Romania for the month, with a burn on his forearm he was refusing to discuss. Harry and Ginny were at the far end. Ron was beside Harry. Rose and Hugo were with the cousins at the children's table, and at no point, Hermione noticed, did Ron look at her. He was not going to make a scene. Hermione knew Ron. He was not going to make a scene in his mother's house on his mother's birthday. He had loved Molly too long and too well for that. But he was not going to look at her either, and he was not going to speak to Draco, and he was going to sit with his shoulders very square and eat his mother's cooking with great concentration, and the weight of his not looking would sit on the table beside the gravy like an uninvited guest. Harry looked, though. He looked at Hermione across the table halfway through the goose, and then he looked at Draco beside her, and then he looked back at Hermione, and one of his eyebrows went up 1/4 of an inch in the small, dry way it had done when they were 19, and she had just done something he thought was brave and stupid in equal measure. She felt her mouth twitch. She lifted her glass 1/2 inch at him. He lifted his in return. It was Harry who, in the end, broke the ice. Malfoy. Draco's head came up from his plate as though he had been shot. Potter. How's the Wizengamot reform brief going? The one Shacklebolts had you on? A small pause. Draco set his knife down very carefully across the edge of his plate. Hermione could feel against her thigh under the table the small involuntary tightening of his hand on the fabric of his trousers. It is. He cleared his throat. It is going. Slowly. The subcommittee has been resistant on the question of hereditary seats. Hermione says you're the one pushing hardest to abolish them. Hermione is kind. Hermione is accurate. Harry's voice was perfectly level. He was not smiling. He was, Hermione realized with a small ringing clarity, doing something deliberate and very careful. He was giving Draco a chair at the table by the simple expedient of speaking to him about his work in a voice that assumed Draco had a right to the work in the first place. No one else at the table was speaking. Molly had set her fork down. Arthur was watching Harry with an expression of great quiet pride. Ron was looking at his plate. Yes, Draco said after a long second. Well, someone had to. Kingsley says you're going to lose the first vote. Almost certainly. And you're going to bring it again. Until it passes. Good. Harry picked his knife back up. He cut a small, neat square of goose. He put it in his mouth. He chewed. He swallowed. He said to his plate, not looking at anyone in particular, "About time someone in that chamber had the stomach for it." Draco did not speak. He could not, Hermione thought. His hand on her thigh under the table had gone very still, and she laid her own hand over it, and she squeezed once, and she felt, through 2 layers of wool and the whole long weight of 3 years, the small, fine tremor in his fingers that he was not going to let anyone else at the table see. Across the room, Ron lifted his head at last. He did not look at Draco. He looked at Hermione. It was a long look, a complicated look, a look with a great many old things in it, and one newer thing. And the newer thing was that he lifted his own glass 1/4 of an inch, and he tipped it at her, small and private, and he took a drink, and he set the glass down. It was not forgiveness. It was not welcome. It was something older and simpler than either. It was, I see you. I see you are still here. I see you have brought him, and I am not going to make you sorry. She tipped her own glass back at him. Then she looked down at her plate, and she ate her potatoes, and she did not let herself cry until she was in Molly's pantry 15 minutes later, ostensibly fetching the cream. Molly found her there. Oh, lovey. I am sorry, Molly. I am only... Don't you dare apologize. Come here. She came. Molly Weasley wrapped her in her soft, strong arms and held her the way she had held her at 17, the first Christmas of the war, in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place. And Hermione stood in the cold of the pantry with her face pressed into the shoulder of a woman who smelled of goose fat and bread and lavender soap, and she cried, very quietly, for no longer than a minute. Molly did not speak. Molly only held on. Molly. Thank you. He is a quiet boy. He is a quiet man now, yes. He looked at my third hook, like he thought I was going to take it back. Oh, Hermione, I nearly wept into the gravy. Molly pulled back. She took Hermione's face in her floury hands. You tell him I meant it. About the hook. Any Sunday he likes. You tell him that, Hermione. I do not say it twice. I will tell him. Good girl. Now. She patted Hermione's cheek briskly. Cream. Go on. The trifle is waiting. They walked back up the lane in the low gold of a winter afternoon. The sky had gone pink at the edges. Somewhere in the hedgerow a robin was making its small, brave winter song. Draco's hand in Hermione's was very warm, and in the other hand he carried a Tupperware. A Tupperware. Molly had pressed it into his palm at the door and closed his fingers around it, full of leftover goose and 2 slices of the burnt bread, and, underneath, a small foil-wrapped parcel that Molly had whispered, urgently, was a little of the trifle. For tomorrow he's too thin. Draco had not spoken since Molly had closed the door behind them. Hermione had not pushed. At the top of the lane, where they would disapparate, he stopped. He turned toward her. The pink of the late sun was on his face, softening the sharp lines of it, and his eyes were very grey and very still, and he set the Tupperware down, carefully, reverently, in the frozen grass at their feet, and he took her by the shoulders, and for the first time in a year he looked at her as though he had been starving and had just been given permission to eat. Hermione. Yes. Thank you. Draco. No. Let me. Only once. Thank you. For Molly's third hook. For Potter asking about the brief. For Weasley lifting his glass to you across the table, which I saw. For the Tupperware. For bringing me here. For knowing I could bear it. For knowing I could not bear any more a life in which I did not. Draco. I think I am going to kiss you now. Is that? Yes. He kissed her. It was not the kiss she had been expecting. She had been expecting something careful, something apologetic, something slow, the small, tentative pressure of a man who has not touched his wife in a year. What she got was a kiss like a held breath at last released. His hands were in her hair. His mouth was warm on hers, and then warmer, and he made a small broken sound against her lips that was half her name and half something older than her name. And she rose up on her toes, and she fisted both hands in the front of his plain dark jumper, and she kissed him back with everything she'd been saving. Every Sunday she had not invited him to the burrow. Every morning she had poured his tea and not looked up. Every night for 8 nights running, she had not sent him the letter in the drawer. She gave him all of it at the top of the lane, with the robins singing in the hedge and the Tupperware of Molly Weasley's trifle sitting in the frosted grass beside their feet. And when at last he drew back to breathe, he did not go far. He only pressed his forehead to hers, the way she had pressed hers to his 5 nights ago on the window seat. And he laughed, a small, wet, astonished laugh, and he said against her mouth, "I have been such an idiot. Yes, for a year. Yes. Take me home, Hermione. Please, take me home." Spring came late that year. It came in small, slow installments. A first green haze on the birches in the homewood at the end of February, a single snowdrop under the library window, the first morning Hermione threw open the bedroom casement without flinching at the cold. The manor held on to winter longer than the rest of Wiltshire. It always had, Narcissa said, something to do with the stone. But by the second week of March, the yew walk had begun to thaw, and the south terrace caught the sun from 11 till 3. And one Saturday morning, Draco Malfoy appeared at breakfast in shirt sleeves for the first time in Hermione's memory, and she had set her teacup down very carefully so as not to make a fuss of it. The Gringotts signing had taken place in January in a small, dark-panelled office deep under Diagon Alley. Draco had sat on one side of a long oak table and Hermione on the other, and the goblin solicitor had read out, in a voice like dry leaves, the long list of things being restored to the estate of Draco Lucius Malfoy. The vineyards at Toulouse, the Salzburg house with its river terrace, the small white villa above the cove at Skyathos, the Gringotts seat, the Wizengamot seat, the family vault unjointured. And Draco had taken the quill that was offered him, and he had looked across the table at Hermione, and he had not signed. "Hermione, yes, I should like you named on the deeds, all of them, jointly, not as consort, as principal." The goblin had lifted his head very slowly. "Mr. Malfoy, that is irregular." "Yes," Draco had said pleasantly. "It is. Draw it up again, please." They had redrawn it. It had taken another hour. Hermione had sat in the dark office with her hands folded in her lap and watched her husband reshape a 300-year-old family settlement with the small bored patience of a man ordering a second pot of tea. And at the end of it, she had signed beside him, and the goblin had pressed the seal, and Draco had paid the fee, and they had walked out into Diagon Alley in a light cold rain, and he had bought her a bag of roasted chestnuts from a barrow on the corner, and they had eaten them walking, and he had not let go of her hand once. And at the corner of Nocturne, the corner she had always flinched at, he had paused and looked down at her and said very quietly, "It does not frighten me any more. Do you know, that corner? No? No, I did not notice until just now." She had leaned her forehead briefly against his shoulder in the rain. That had been January. Now it was March, and Rita Skeeter's second piece had come and gone. Malfoy Granger reconciliation, a cynical ploy, insider's fear. And Hermione had read it over breakfast and laughed and passed it to Draco, and Draco had read it and folded it and set it on the fire, and they had finished their coffee. In February, Hermione had been given her old public-facing position at Magical Law back. The minister had come in person to offer it, looking slightly embarrassed, and she had accepted with the small dry grace her mother-in-law had spent 3 years teaching her. Draco had brought the Wizengamot reform bill again in the first week of March. He had lost the vote. He was bringing it again in June. They had been invited to 4 Sunday luncheons at the Burrow since January. They had gone to 3. The 4th they had missed because Hermione had been ill for a fortnight in February with a cold that had refused to leave her chest, and Molly Weasley had sent, by owl, a jar of chicken broth and a short note that had said only, "Eat it hot. Make him eat some too. He is still too thin." Monsieur Draco had made the broth himself. He had done it badly. He had refused to allow Tibby into the kitchen for the duration. He had brought it up to her on a tray with 3 kinds of spoon because he had not been able to decide which was correct. And Hermione, sitting up in bed in the grey cashmere dressing gown with her nose red and her hair in a braid, had looked at the 3 spoons and had begun to cry. And he had been appalled, and she had had to explain between laughing and crying that she was crying because she was happy, and he had sat down on the edge of the bed with the tray on his lap, and he had said, in the small wry voice he used now for only the most serious things, "That is unhelpful information, Hermione. In future, please signal in some other way." "I will try. Eat your soup." She had eaten her soup. The Saturday in March that Draco came down in shirt sleeves, he came to find her after breakfast in the Blue Room. She had gone up there to sort books. It had become, over the winter, a small project of hers. The Blue Room had sat in its pale silk hush for too long, used only for guests who never came, and Hermione had decided some time in January that she wanted to reclaim it. Not as a guest room, not as a library either, something else. She had been sitting in it for an hour with a cup of cooling tea at her elbow and a pile of her old books on the floor, and she had not yet decided what the something else was. Draco knocked before he came in. He still did that now. He had begun doing it in December, and she had not asked him to stop. "Hermione." "Tibby says the daffodils have come out in the south border." "Have they?" 3 days early. She is very pleased with herself. She is taking personal credit. As she should. "May I come in?" "You are in." "I know. I was being polite." "Come. Sit." He came. He folded himself down onto the pale carpet beside her. Not on the settee, not in the desk chair, on the carpet, with his long legs crossed at the ankle and his back against the foot of the bed. And he reached across and picked up the top book on her pile and turned it over in his hands. It was the battered Persuasion. "Ah," he said. "I have been meaning to ask you." "Yes. What is this room going to be?" Hermione sat back on her heels. She looked around. The pale silk walls, the tall east window with its view of the yew-walk, the small writing desk, the carved bed, which she had decided last week to have taken out, the empty patch of wall above the fireplace, where, as a boy, Draco had had a portrait of his grandfather that Hermione had taken down in her first winter in the house and put in a back attic, and had, she realized, never got round to replacing. "I don't know," she said. "No?" "I thought a sitting room, a small one, for us. Not a formal one. Somewhere we sit, in the evenings, together, Not the library, not the drawing room, just ours. And then I thought. She stopped. She did not know quite how to say it. She looked down at her hands. Draco did not press her. He did not press her now about anything. He only set the book down on the carpet between them and laid his hand on her ankle, the smallest, most grounding touch, and he waited. I thought, she said, that one day, not soon, not yet, but one day, it might become a nursery, possibly, if that was something we, eventually, wanted. I do not mean tomorrow, Draco. I only... Hermione. Yes. Look at me, please. She looked. His face was very still. His eyes were very grey. The early spring sun was on the bones of his jaw, making them soft. His hand on her ankle had tightened, very slightly, and then relaxed. I should like that, he said. Yes? Yes. Not tomorrow. One day. Yes. Yes. They sat for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The sun moved a small distance along the carpet. Out in the hall, a clock chimed the half-hour, and somewhere in the house Tibby was singing. Tibby had, since January, begun to sing while she worked, a thing she had not done in the 6 years she had served the manor, and Narcissa had remarked upon it at her last visit, and had then turned her face to the window for a small private moment, before asking briskly for more tea. Draco. Kiss me. He did. He rose up onto his knees on the pale carpet, and he took her face in both hands, and he kissed her, not the kiss at the top of the lane in Devon that had been a starving kiss. This was something else, slower, deeper, the kiss of a man who had come to understand that he had, at last, as much time as he wanted. She kissed him back. The battered Persuasion fell off the pile of books with a small, soft thud, and neither of them noticed. His hand came up into her hair. Her hand slid to the warm, bare place at the base of his throat, where the collar of his open shirt ended. When at last he drew back, he did not go far, only enough to rest his forehead against hers, and he said, as he had said now, on a number of mornings since January, as a small daily spell that neither of them tired of, he said very quietly, I am here. Hermione, I am here. I know. Say you know. I know, Draco. I know. They were married for 61 years in the end. That is a long time. It is a long time for anyone, and it was a long time for them. They had not, either of them, expected it. They had buried Narcissa in the spring of the 11th year, and Molly Weasley in the 23rd, and a great many other people besides, and they had celebrated a great many things too. The passage of the Wizengamot Reform Bill in the end, in the summer of the 7th year, with Draco weeping very quietly in the gallery, while Hermione held his hand. The opening of the magical law aid clinic in Diagon Alley in the 9th. The birth, in the 5th year, of a daughter they named Cassiopeia, who had her father's grey eyes and her mother's brown curls, and a temper that Narcissa pronounced, with great satisfaction, entirely her grandmother's. And 4 years after that, a son, who had his mother's hazel eyes and his father's slow, careful mouth, and a habit of standing very still in corners and noticing things, whom they called Leo. The Blue Room became the nursery in the spring of the 5th year. It stopped being the nursery in the summer of the 21st, when Leo went off to Hogwarts. After that, Hermione and Draco used it again as a sitting room, the small private one she had wanted from the start, and they sat in it in the evenings and did not often speak, and did not often need to. They never left the manor. They had talked about it once or twice in the early years. It was a great cold house, and neither of them had ever quite been happy in its formal rooms. But Hermione had, slowly, made it theirs. The long gallery filled up with photographs, Muggle and magical both. The breakfast room was repapered in a green Draco pretended to hate and secretly loved. The east wing was given over to the children, and then to the children's children. And the house that had once been a tomb full of lit candles became, by slow, sure degrees, a house that was full because people lived in it. Rita Skeeter wrote about them 3 more times in the first decade. She stopped after that. She had not, in the end, been able to find a story in a marriage that had, by its 11th year, become the kind of thing people in Diagon Alley pointed out to their children as evidence that the war had ended, really ended, and that the world had, against all odds, gone on. On the last morning of the first spring, the spring Hermione stood in the blue room and thought about daffodils and nurseries, Draco walked her out onto the south terrace to see Tibby's early daffodils for himself. The sun was very bright. The yew walk was beginning at last to green. The daffodils were a small, brave yellow crowd along the south border, exactly as Tibby had said. Hermione tucked her arm through her husband's and leaned her head briefly against his shoulder, and he turned his face and kissed the top of her hair, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. Draco. We did it, you know. Did we? Yes. Look, we are standing on our own terrace on a Saturday morning, and the daffodils are out, and no one is frightened, and no one is leaving, and I am not cold, Draco. I am not cold anymore. We did it. He did not answer for a moment. He only drew her closer against his side, and he looked out over the yew walk and the thawed lawn and the bright yellow border. And after a time, he said very quietly into her hair, "Yes, against the world, Hermione. We did." And he kissed her there on the terrace in the clear March sun, with the daffodils nodding in a small south wind, and the manor rising warm and lit behind them. And it was not a starving kiss, and not a desperate kiss, and not any kind of a kiss that was trying to say a thing. It was only the kiss of a man saying good morning to his wife, whom he loved, and who loved him, and with whom he had built, slowly, badly, beautifully together, a life. The end.
Thank you for staying with me until the end. I wanted to write this story for a long time. Not a story about the war, not a story about magic, a story about what happened after the wedding, after the big choice, after the world says no, not her, not him, not together. I think we forget something. We think love is the hard part. It is not. Love is easy. Two people look at each other and they know. The hard part comes later. The hard part is the quiet morning, the cold tea, the small silence at the dinner table, the ring that slips into pocket, the letter in a drawer that no one sends and no one throws away. Draco and Hermione did not fall out of love. They forgot how to speak. That's a different thing, and I think many of us know it. If you are in a quiet season with someone you love, please do not wait. Do not sleep in the other room for one more night. Say the thing, ask the question, put the ring back on. The world is loud, the world will always be loud. But a home is a small, quiet place that two people build together. One honest sentence,